Hello everybody, welcome back to another video here on my channel. It is the end of another month, so you know what that means. It is time for our book wrap up. And this month I feel like I did pretty good, really good actually. Because normally I read maybe at the most 6 books. For the most part though, I'm really reading 4 books at the most, a book a week if I can. I don't always have the time that I want, so I don't always read. I actually read 8 books this month, unless you count these 3 up top. They can actually be combined for the most part for one whole book, and then I would have only read 6 books. These are the 8 books, and let's go ahead and get into my wrap up. If you guys have been to my channel and seen a lot of my reading vlogs, then you might have known that here recently I just finished the Harry Potter series, and I did have this collection of 3 books. It's actually the Hogwarts library, so we just have Quidditch Through the Ages, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and also the Tales of Beedle the Bard. So they're 3 pretty much 100-page books, and they're also not necessarily actual books. I've had these. I thought I wanted to read these, and I kind of did. I didn't rate them because what do you rate these, in all honesty? I did a lot of skimming, especially in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, because I thought it was going to be more almost like a glossary index, but as a whole book. So I did read Quidditch Through the Ages. That one I fully read, and then the Tales of Beedle the Bard I did kind of read, but at the same time I was watching the Deathly Hallows, so a lot of those stories were already in that specific movie to a point. Not all of them, but a couple of them. So this is just fantasy. It's just YA, I guess you could say. It just goes along with the Harry Potter series. Like I said, I rated it 0 stars. And yeah, there's really not much to it, but this was my last Harry Potter related book that I have, or that I own. Then we get into a thriller, which I do believe is a 7 or 8 book series, and I only have one of them. I only have the first one. I found this at a Goodwill, and it felt very nice because it's like matte, but it looks really good, really interesting, and it is Stillhouse Lake by Rachel Kane. I actually rated it 4 stars. It has around 301 pages, and pretty much it's about this wife who, she lives in like the cookie cutter home, the suburban areas. Pretty much she's like a stay-at-home wife. She bakes all the time, she does all this, she's like that perfect wife, and she agrees to let her husband take the garage over and turn it into a workshop. So he takes the garage door, I do believe he takes it out and puts up a wall, and then he bolts access door, like the personnel door, to the inside of the house, and then he deadlocks where you needed a key to get into the side personnel door. So he does all this stuff to the garage, and she just thinks it's his way of trying to escape for woodworking. So she comes home one day after picking up the kids from school, and she finds out that her street actually is blocked off. Ambulances and fire trucks and also like police. And as she gets closer, she talks to a cop and she's like, hey, that's my house. He ends up eventually pulling her out of the car. They arrest her actually for suspect into her husband's murders. Her husband was actually a murderer, and she never knew that anything was going on. He used to kidnap young women, and it was kind of intriguing. I'm not gonna lie. It was very intriguing, but at the same time, there were some parts where I was like, all right, we still have like 100 pages left, and I felt like either not necessarily nothing was happening, but I was kind of like trying to wrap it up, and then there would be another issue, another conflict type thing. It wasn't necessarily too bad. I feel like they were kind of good, but it had a lot of like getting resolved and then something happening, kind of like twist. Some of them were a couple twists, and then others were just like extra added things that some of them I didn't feel like necessary, but I did overall enjoy this book. It was 4 stars. These books are technically kind of like standalones. You can read them by themselves, but I do believe everybody says to go in order, start with the first book and continue if you can. I want to eventually get the rest. They are all about her and her 2 kids, I do believe. It does, for a small smidge, have a subplot of romance in it. There's just something that I'm not gonna spoil just in case, but there's something that goes on with the subplot of romance. I was very happy about this book, especially because it was one of those that I found interesting on the cover, so I picked it up not knowing a dang thing about it besides what was on the back of the book, and I brought it home, and of course it turned out to be pretty decent, at least in my opinion. Then after book shopping, and that vlog and also that massive book haul should be up by now, after spending a lot of money and buying 52 books, I picked up Nicholas Sparks' Dreamland, and this was around 360 pages. I rated it 4 stars. The majority of Nicholas Sparks books are always going to be 4-star reads for me. This book was pretty interesting. I also found it kind of unrealistic with the female. I don't know if it's because Nicholas Sparks, he's been famous for a very long time. He's probably has, I don't know, I've never looked him up on social media, but I'm sure he has a big following. And when he wrote about his character, she was trying to be humble, I think, in a way, but at the same time, when they were talking about how big she was on TikTok, she was like, oh, we only have a couple million, and I'm like, okay, that is just an absurd number. I feel like most people, even if they are famous, they do not have 1 million or above. They usually a couple thousand to a couple 100,000, and they're still relatively famous, well known. So I did find that a little bit more unrealistic, but I did like the actual story. I was kind of confused for half the book. He did a 2 different parts. The second part was almost more of like a thriller mystery. No, it was more like a thriller coming into play, and I was kind of confused because I knew the 2 stories had to connect somewhere. After a while, I was getting very unsure of how the 2 stories would connect, because it was basically about a woman and her child who escaped her abusive husband, got on a bus, a plane, and then she was thinking that her neighbors were spying on her in the fields, and also that somebody kept knocking on the doors, people were going through her house, and she was having to live with like a little bit of cash. Like I said, I knew it had to connect somewhere, but they were just 2 completely different stories, and I was a little bit confused on how I felt about it, but then at the ending it made a lot of sense. But all in all, I did enjoy this book. Next, we had a little series that I loved. I know a lot of people on Goodreads hated this book. I enjoyed the series a lot. I loved it, and I think this author is a really good author, more so for like more YA. She has written a really good series that is very popular. A lot of people hate the last book. It is Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth. She is the person who wrote Divergent, and this is a young adult sci-fi. I rated this one 4 stars. Like I said, I love this book so much. It's around 468 pages. Basically, we have 2 main characters, Akos and Syra. Once upon a time, something happens, and then later on, Akos eventually goes into Syra's planet. He ends up there. I'm not gonna say how or why, but it is very, very early in the book. So he ends up on her planet, and he is with her family. She is actually born, I kind of explained it before as she's born into royalty, but she's not really royalty, if that makes sense. She's like born into a family who's ruled the planet, but they're not royalty. And how they come into it is not a very honorable way. He is with their family. Syra has chronic pain. She has this thing called the current gift, where everybody's current gift usually from the current up in space, normally something really good, like they can look into the future, they can help people, they can ease people's pain, they can do, you know, all this other stuff. But for her, she actually has pain, and it's all the time, and you can see it as it's described. It's like dark veins, dark marks all over her for a lot of the book. Because of Akos's current gift, which his just disrupts the current, he can actually touch her, and he ends up being like her buffer. He helps her by just like touching her every now and then, like holding hands, something like that, just so that her current gift goes away, she doesn't have as much pain. There's a big friendship that ends up growing, and there's a lot of twists and turns, and while you're reading this book, you're also going through kind of like a war in a way. It's not so much a war in this book as it is the second book, but as we get farther along, there's more stuff that happens. There's a lot of information that gets divulged. There's a lot of twists and turns. There's a lot of things that just, in my opinion, made it really good. It's kind of like 50-50 is how I described it. You got 50% action, and then you got some 50% or less, but it's more like backstory or like describing it, or they're just like friends talking, you know, they're together. It's not necessarily the most hyped up action induced scenes, but it's also, in my opinion, not boring. I thought it was real intriguing, and there is a little bit of repetition in this book. I think more so the next book. All in all, I did enjoy this book, and I rated this one 4 stars. At 443, we have The Fates Divide. This is book 2 in the series. This is the last book, and pretty much you don't necessarily end on a huge cliffhanger, but you kind of end on a cliffhanger. I rated this one as well 4 stars. You hop into this book, and there is a lot of repetition when explaining the last book, and farther along into the book you get also a little bit of repetition for explaining what happened at the beginning of this book. I do believe there's just a lot of like over explaining, over saying the same things. Some of the things that happened in this book, there was a lot more twists and turns, a lot more action. A lot of people said that this was their favorite book, and I have to agree that this technically would have been the better book because there's more stuff that went on. There's more the, not betrayal, but almost like that feeling. Syra did kind of bug me at times because she was a little bit self-explosive, and she also had moments where she wanted to pick fights with every single person she met or she's seen, and it was just kind of obnoxious because she was ruining relationships, or I was bound to determine she was going to ruin a specific relationship that I was not about to watch, and I was getting kind of upset. But other than that, like, the book is not bad. It's probably better than the first, but technically I enjoyed Carve the Mark more just because of the whole how they built their friendship, and then what all transpires from that, and also some of the things that take place that kind of disrupts their friendship. I kind of liked it because going into this book, they already have that friendship, they already have all that known history, even if it's only been a few years together. They already have that that history. So then when you go into this book, you're pretty much just them together for the most part. I did enjoy this book a lot. I enjoyed this whole series. I think it's a really great series, and I really do like the covers. Like, they're pretty basics. I like the spines, especially sitting on a shelf. I think they're kind of pretty. And each of these books on the front have little details you can't really see because it's so dark over here kind of, but they both have this map printed on the front of the cover, and I just think that's a nice little touch. I love when books are a little bit more decorative on pages. They have maps in them, decorative on the spines or on the covers, also just the actual binding. So overall, I think this series would have to be a 4-star series for me, but I know there's a lot of controversy over these books and also over Veronica Roth, just because of one, Divergent, but two, this series seemed to bug a lot of people. I'm gonna still stick by my rating because I didn't notice all that. So, and the very last book that I finished this month off with, and I finished it yesterday, it is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This is a 361 page book, and I have to say, controversy aside, because I know how much people love beach read, I liked People We Met on Vacation more than beach read. No, a lot of people hate this book or can't get into this book and then absolutely love beach read, and there's been a lot of 5 stars. Beach read for me, I was kind of in a slump, but beach read for me was 4 stars, and I thought it was kind of overhyped. People We Met on Vacation, I found more interesting, mainly because beach read's main character I didn't like as much. I loved Gus. I didn't have a problem with Gus at all. January was kind of like an iffy person. Like, sometimes I liked her and I felt like I liked her more as the book went on, but in the beginning it was less, and it just kind of ruined it for me, just some of the things she would say or how she would act on certain things. I did rate this one 4 stars, the same rating as beach read. I will say I kind of enjoy how pretty much, it wasn't necessarily every other chapter, but pretty much every other chapter was going back from 12 summers, and then it would go 11 summers and 10 summers, and pretty much all the way up to 2 summers ago where Poppy and Alex had this falling out. I was kind of intrigued because I kind of liked it a little bit drawn out, but I was worried about the actual reason why they grew apart for a couple years. I was worried about that being more of like anticlimactic and not necessarily that big of a deal. I feel like it could have been a bigger issue, but I don't feel like it was as like tiny of an issue or anticlimactic as, oh, he ate my pizza, you know, something stupid like that. I feel like what happened was actually pretty decent. It wasn't as big as I expected it to be, but it also made a little bit of sense, and I don't think it was bad for that. I kind of liked having the backstory, and I kind of enjoyed when it finally came along, but at the same time there was so much going on around, like when we transpire back to the point of view that's called this summer, there was just so much stuff happening in this summer that I was kind of taking away from when finally we got to 2 summers ago when they had their falling out. And also what happened in here, I thought when she was in New York at the very end of this book, before pretty much the epilogue and maybe like the last chapter, I could have swore somebody she met from high school or she re-met on accident. I thought something was going to transpire, and then the last literally like 20 pages of this book, I thought she was gonna end up like falling in love with this guy, and I was like, I'm not ready for that. I'm going to be very upset if that's what happens. And thankfully he's like, nope, I'm married. I got a wife that I love wholeheartedly. Like, yes, thank you. I did enjoy this book, and I really liked Alex. I liked how technically sweet he was. There's a lot of things with like romance books that bother me, and it's more of like the moral side, but at the same time, like, they're fun. They're, especially when they're not too descriptive, they're pretty decent for me at least to kind of read, and they're just fun and entertaining. And the banter is pretty decent. I like them joking around. I like how their friendship is. I like reading about their friendship. I have to say, I really, really like Alex. Out of all the books I've ever read, he's the most close to my husband, just because he asked questions like if something was okay, and he was just very like sweet, and that's like the closest I've ever read to my husband in a book. So I think that's why I like Alex the most. But yeah, that's my thoughts on this book. That is the 8 books I've read for this wrap up, and overall I read a total of 2,216 pages, which isn't my most, even though it's the most books I think I've read in a month, but it has to be because 3 of those books were 100 pages at the most. Overall, my favorite book I read this whole month would have to be Carve the Mark. I just love the experience I had with this book. I've read them all pretty quickly. I was reading like 100 to 200 pages a day, and because of that I was going through them, and it was just really entertaining for me. And the feeling I got when I was reading this book, I was just more immersed into the world. So I have to say that this overall would be my favorite book. Stillhouse Lake was a book that surprised me at being a pretty decent book, but I was kind of skeptical, but it also sounded really, really good. So this has a win for that. If we're talking books, I'd have to say The Hogwarts Legacy is my least favorite read books. If we're not talking about this little collection of books, then I have to say that Dreamland is my least favorite book, but it's not a bad book in my opinion. So keep that in mind. And then the other book that didn't necessarily surprise me, but because of the down hype, I'm gonna call it, it wasn't necessarily hyped up. A lot of people said they didn't like it. Really known booktubers said that they tried to get into it, but they couldn't get into it. So this book that piqued my interest, but I was also worried going into it, was actually People We Met on Vacation. And it's only because I heard so many negative things about this book, and it turned out better than Beach Read for me. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I already have next month's TBR picked and also uploaded. It will be posted next week, and that is because somebody who cannot see actually picked my TBR, and I'm really excited about that video. I feel like it went pretty good. I feel like if I do this in the future, I'm gonna do it a little bit different, kind of how I did it at the end to pick my last 2 books, because that seemed to be one of the best ways. It was kind of entertaining for me, and I tried not to cut out so much of how she picked my TBR, just because I felt like it was good to see. So stay tuned for that video. That will be next week. That will be posted. I'm excited about that video, and I hope you guys enjoy that video. But thank you all so much for watching this video. Hope to see y'all next week, and God bless.